Video 4 or 5, where we're going to go over the note sources. These are sources that deal with note data or information that's packaged with note data, like aftertouch. So you've probably heard of polyphonic aftertouch. It means that aftertouch can actually be packaged with every single MIDI note. Not many controllers actually output polyphonic aftertouch, but some do. Anyway, in order for me to use this, Karma always needs to be on. In fact, for all of these sources, Karma needs to be on, because when Karma is off, it basically acts like a MIDI filter that's disabling any note information, or what Karma calls dynamic MIDI information, things like, anything on this list. So with our with this on and this set to aftertouch, there's still something wrong. My port is module 1. It's using module 1's port channel and key zone. If you look at my MIDI, module 1 is getting its information, its MIDI information from Cubase. And therefore, I can't use the Kronos itself to actually send note data. I have to instead use my alternate dynamic MIDI source, which still doesn't send note on and off data, but it can still send information that is packaged with notes. So let me switch this over to our alternate dynamic MIDI port channel. I'll leave the action on continuous, but yeah, now my aftertouch will in fact change the swing percentage, and I can send that just from the keyboard. The next parameter, oh, by the way, action, I don't think I necessarily need to go over at this point, but I will go over it later when I'm going over different sources. This is basically going to behave exactly as expected, where momentary is just after it gets past the top, and then it resets after it goes past the bottom. And then toggle is the same thing, except it's every other time it goes past those thresholds. So anyway, the next parameter is JSX, otherwise called pitch bend data. So let me just go into a little explanation. Like aftertouch, it can pitch bend is actually per note. And you experience that with the Kronos itself just when you change temperaments. So let's say you change to something like perfect major. That's actually changing the the third of every note, depending on what key you're in, just a bit to make those harmonics align perfectly in a sawtooth wave or whatever, what have you. So yeah, so this is pitch bend, and that's going to be JSX. When I go to the right, we're at max value. Resting state is 50. Going to the left is 0. The next one is our first note. So this is note duration. And for this one, I am going to switch to module 1. And let me pop over to Cubase. I have looping here. A bunch of, actually, let me just hit, what is it, Control F? No, not that. I don't know what that was. Stop. Okay, Shift F. There we go. Now it's all in this window. So I have short little notes here. They're all 40 milliseconds, quantized to the grid at 30-second notes. And this is reading the duration of a note. That is the length that the note was on. And then it's saying like, okay, if it was short, then I'm going to output whatever value that note was. So to explain that, let me show you zones. So, and let me actually, I have this event muted. I'm going to go ahead and unmute it. Okay, so you can see we're sending data that's over here up at this this C5. This is C#5, which is a value of 73. So you can see down here it says C012. That's MIDI note number 12. And then all the way up here we have B8, which is MIDI note number 119. So that would be like akin to a CC value of 119. So anyway, let's output a value of 64, which would be, what would that be, like E? So we're at C4 60, 61, 62, 63. Yeah, so E4 is 64. Now we're outputting a value of 64. And you can actually see that it's at 50% swing. So we're at half value, and we're and you can see that it's outputting the proper value. If I move this up, these short little notes will continue to be read and output, its corresponding value. I want to actually see something because I didn't test for this. What if I wanted to read that notes have to be longer than 45 milliseconds in order to send out an output value? Maybe if I switch the polarity, it might work like that. I highly doubt it. Yeah, no. It's still reading it. It's still reading short notes, and that's what's outputting the value. I'm kind of surprised that there's not an like the opposite version of this parameter. Yeah, oh well. So since this is our first note, I should say that the behavior of these are going to be different. And in fact, the behavior of this is kind of specific for short notes, for momentary. Saying that basically the state of the note, whether the note is on, acts as like the state of the switch. It's already off by the time it knows if it's less than 45 milliseconds. So that means that momentary will always output a value of 0 when note duration less than 45 milliseconds is your source. But toggle will work. So it's basically just toggling. It's like, oh, this note is less than 45 milliseconds, then I'll output this value. This one's less than 45 milliseconds, then I'll output max value. Let's go back to continuous and let's go on to our next. So we have note number. I believe it's note number in selected range. So this is pretty good. Basically, this now selects our range, or it actually scales our range. So much like how we were scaling the range when we were using like a regular CC, like CC01, if we had the bottom at 64, then we wouldn't actually, then at 64, we would be outputting 0. We would be outputting our minimum value. And then when we got up to 127, we'd be outputting our maximum value. So this is still scaling the range, except it's just using the note numbers as our input value. Yep. And then, of course, if the note number is outside of this range, then it's not going to do anything. It's not going to be read. But yeah, I think you understand how that works. And then, like before, toggle and momentary just act as switches based on the state of the note itself. So momentary in this case, I believe, will work. Yeah. So it's when the note is on, it's at 100. When the note is off, it's at 0. Let's go back to continuous. And let's choose the next one. So we have note number inside zone. And you can see that the bottom and top got grayed out in this case because it's just supposed to now depend on the zone from the module. Remember, we're always working on the module's port channel and key zone. So in this case, there's a glitch actually, where if I were to have it on selected note range and then scale the output, that if I then go to the next one, you can see that even though these are grayed out, it still says 39. That would still, unfortunately, affect the output, despite the range in the zone. So anyway, you're supposed to basically use this input source with these grayed out at 0 and 127, and then basically anything that's outside of the zone isn't read anymore. So what are we inputting right here? 72. So let me go to my dynamic MIDI. And so this is continuous, and let's go to momentary. So we do see some modulation going on. And we're outputting a value of 72. And if I go to my zones and then have this go above 72, then we'll see when I get above 72, this will stop flickering. Yep. And then I guess, oh yeah, I was gonna say, I guess it defaults to 0. It actually doesn't. I just happened to catch it at a time that it was at 0. Let me see if I can get it to catch at 100. No, I can't. Maybe it does default just to 0. Seems like it would be a 50-50% chance of me getting it or not. Not quite 50-50, but yeah. Yeah, so maybe it defaults to 0 when it's outside the zone. The note number itself is still outputting a value if this is on continuous. That is like a CC value. You can see on 56. yeah, let's move on to note outside zone. It behaves the exact opposite, where only notes outside of the zone will uh, basically send out parameter value. Then we have white notes only, which works exactly like our note when we got to choose the range or really scale the output. Except only white notes will trigger it, and then black notes, it's just the opposite. So that's everything for this. The next video will be on velocity. And it kind of goes without saying that velocity actually had no effect on anything we did. And in fact, to prove that, I actually did have velocity go from minimum to maximum the whole time while this was looping, and we saw it didn't affect the parameters at all. So hopefully this was illuminating, and we'll see you at the next video. Later.